Please join me in giving a warm welcome to David Gordon.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. The title of this presentation is Dear Friends and Gentle Hearts. And when we come to the end of our 90 minutes, it will be clear to you why I chose that title to talk about this man. I'm going to tell you the story of America's first professional songwriter. His name was Stephen Collins Foster. You know his name, and most of you know at least one of his songs. His songs have woven themselves into the fabric of American culture to the extent that some of them could be considered folk songs. You probably will find many people that you know, if you sing one of his songs, they won't know that it was actually written and copyrighted and published as sheet music. Some of these songs are among the most famous songs in the entire world. And yet this man, so well known to us today, died sick, alone, and penniless at the age of 37. Wow. There are many myths about Stephen Foster. The most pervasive myths are that he had no musical education and was completely self-taught, and that he merely wrote trashy songs that glorified life on the plantation and whitewashed the reality of slavery. None of this is true. In the next 90 minutes, I'm going to tell you the story of his life. I'm going to illustrate my tale with 12 of his songs, which I'm going to sing in the order in which he wrote them. And I need your assistance, please. I need your imagination to help me condense 37 years, 6 months, and 5 days into 90 minutes. The story begins in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1826, the 4th of July. How perfect is that? The 4th of July. There were 24 states in 1826 with 11 million residents, 9 million white citizens, 250,000 free blacks, and nearly 2 million black slaves. On July 4, 1826, the country was celebrating a jubilee. It was the 50th birthday of the Declaration of Independence. And if you know your history, you will know that the two founding fathers perhaps most responsible for the creation of the Declaration of Independence were Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of their magnificent creation, Thomas Jefferson died in his home in Virginia, and just a few hours later, John Adams died in his home in Quincy, Massachusetts. But that afternoon, these two individuals were giving a big party in the backyard of their little house overlooking the Allegheny River on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is William and Eliza Foster. William was a somewhat prosperous businessman in Pittsburgh. He was very active in local government. The backyard was filled with tables, covered with red and white bunting and pictures of George Washington at every table, and all the finest citizenry of Pittsburgh were present for the festivities, except Eliza. She was upstairs in a bedroom in the little house, giving birth to her 9th and last child. It was a little boy. They named him Stephen, and his nickname his whole life long among his friends and family was Stevie. He was an average student, but an avid and very gifted musician. He taught himself to play piano, guitar, flute, and clarinet. But here we deal with the first myth about Stephen, that he was only self-taught and had no formal education, and that's not true at all. As a teenager, he studied piano, music theory, and composition with a German immigrant named Henry Kleber, who introduced Stephen to fine European classical music. Kleber had spent the first 15 years of his life in Darmstadt, Germany, where he studied at the Darmstadt Conservatory, and by age 15, when he came to the United States, he was already a fine pianist. Kleber came to the USA with his parents in 1831. At that time, Pittsburgh had one music store, a handful of music teachers, and 4 fledgling choral organizations performing works by Mozart, Schubert, Rossini, and other European composers. After 2 years in Pittsburgh, Mr. Klaber had become part of the small city's musical scene. He would live there well into his 80s, and he would go on to be a major influence in Pittsburgh's musical life as a teacher, composer, performer, and musical merchant. He sold Steinway pianos in his music store. Stephen began taking music lessons with Klaber when Stephen was 15 and Klaber was only 25. They remained friends until Stephen's death 2 decades later. Henry Klaber taught Stephen how to write songs. He introduced the teenager to the music of Mozart and to Beethoven and Carl Maria von Weber and Franz Schubert and Felix Mendelssohn. With Klaber, Stephen also studied the songs of the British composer Henry Bishop, who wrote countless songs, including Home Sweet Home, the most popular song in America in the 19th century. Please understand, this is the way composers learn to write music. They study the music of other composers. Stephen was lucky. He had a well-trained German musician who introduced him to fine European music. In Stephen's songs, you can hear traces of Henry Bishop, the Englishman, Franz Schubert, the Viennese song composer, and other brilliant European songwriters. While studying with Klaber, Stephen published his first song in the spring of 1844, when he was 17 years old. It's called Open Thy Lattice, Love. The lyrics are by the American poet and lyricist George Morris, best known to 19th century poetry aficionados for his stirring poem, Woodsman, Spare That Tree. Stephen noticed the poem in a magazine and created the song as a vocal quartet for his singing club in Pittsburgh. Privately tutored by his fine German teacher in the refined manner of European harmony, the 17-year-old Pittsburgh boy produced a simple, elegant ballad. Open thy lattice, love, listen to me. The cool, balmy breeze is abroad on the sea. The moon, like a queen, roams her realms of blue, and the stars keep their vigils in heaven for you. Ere morn's gushing light tips the bills with its ray, away all the waters, away and away. Then open thy lattice, love, listen to me, while the moon's in the sky and the breeze on the sea. Thank you. I sang only the first verse of this song. I'm doing 12 songs, and I'm going to skip some of the verses in some of the songs so I can fit more songs into the hour. Among Stephen's 158 songs, there are a couple dozen settings that have poetry written by other people. And of the 12 songs I'm singing for you today, this is one of only 2 songs I'm singing today whose lyrics are not by Stephen Foster. Before I go to the next slide, I want to point out a poignant little factoid, if you've not already noticed it. I'm sure the 17-year-old Stephen was really thrilled to hold in his hands the sheet music of his very first published song. Keep in mind, the publisher did not pay him money for this song. He was paid, as were all beginning composers, with copies of the sheet music. And there in big letters on the cover it says L.C. Foster. The initials are wrong. It should say S.C. Foster. As a young singer, my first major recording was with Seiji Ozawa and the Boston Symphony. I'm a tenor, and the record jacket says David Gordon Baritone. And it still does to this day. And now, after all those years, that's about 40 years ago, I can laugh about it, and I hope that Stephen eventually could laugh about this as well. L.C. Foster. When Stephen published this first song in 1844, at the age of 17, the minstrel show was rapidly becoming the most popular performing arts genre on the American stage. To understand what Stephen accomplished artistically and morally in his life, we need to understand where he started. And I need to take a few moments to talk about this. And in doing so, I want to make sure that my feelings about it are quite clear to you. Minstrel shows were white musicians, white men, in black makeup, wearing grotesque costumes, and singing songs that caricatured and mocked African Americans and whitewashed the reality of slavery and slave life on plantations. This is where my narration gets a bit thorny for a few minutes, because we need to go deep into a very dark time in the history of the performing arts in the United States. Performing in blackface first achieved a commercial success in the early 1830s with several solo entertainers, and chief among them was a man named Thomas Dartmouth Rice. Rice was born in 1808 in New York City. He was a solo entertainer and a comedian who appeared in seedy and disreputable venues from New York to the southern states. He danced, he sang, and he wrote his own songs. In 1833, when he was in his mid-20s, he developed a colorful and grotesque character for his stage performances. He painted his face black with burnt cork. He put on a shabby, ragged costume, and he portrayed a wily, dishonest, distasteful, arrogant black man who he called Jim Crow. This is the origin of the term Jim Crow. Rice's on-stage portrayal of this character popularized the perception of African Americans as lazy, untrustworthy, dumb, superficially clever, and unworthy of respect or integration. Thomas Rice's performances were malicious and harmful, but their popularity with audiences did not go unnoticed by other musicians, and a new genre of stage performances grew up around the concept of ridiculing black Americans, both free blacks and enslaved blacks. This was the beginning of the American minstrel show, in which ensembles of white performers imitated Rice's use of blackface and his stereotypical and mocking depiction of a powerless and marginalized population. Minstrel performers spread this racist message and ideas manifested by the character of Jim Crow to audiences across the United States in the 1830s and 1840s, contributing to white Americans' negative view of African Americans and their character, their work ethic, their honesty, and their intelligence. The format and theme of these shows caught on like wildfire because most Americans believed it. By 1840, there were professional minstrel troupes touring the U.S. from Boston to New Orleans to San Francisco. For several decades in the mid-19th century, minstrel shows, as I said, were the most popular form of stage entertainment in the U.S. The minstrel shows and their songs were cheap and vulgar and without redeeming value. Songs have been written by countless songwriters, and I have perused hundreds and hundreds of them so that you don't have to. They are foul and worthless, and I refuse to even speak most of the titles. But for white Americans in the 1840s and 1850s, especially for Northerners, many of whom had never seen a slave, the minstrel shows reinforced a comforting misconception of slave life. The minstrel shows painted a reassuring picture of the southern plantation where everything was perfect. The slaves were simple-minded and happy and lovable, and they enjoyed gentle, rustic pleasures while reaping the rewards of honest toil. These, of course, are lies. Speaking truth to power, as he always did, the great African-American writer and abolitionist and former slave Frederick Douglass wrote about minstrel shows in a newspaper article in 1848. In an editorial in his own newspaper in New York, Douglas referred by name to several leading minstrel troupes and called them the filthy scum of white society who have stolen from us a complexion denied them by nature, in which to make money and pander to the corrupt taste of their white fellow citizens. I have nothing to add to what Frederick Douglass said, and I do not ever sing any minstrel songs in any of my own concerts, except in the historical context of this presentation about Stephen Foster's life. Stephen was 22 when Frederick Douglass wrote those words, and like most Northerners, he had little real awareness of the reality of slave life in the South. His family had indentured servants in Pittsburgh when they could afford them, which was the closest thing you could get to a slave north of the Mason-Dixon line. But his family supported slavery, and in fact, during the Civil War, his parents backed the Confederate States. But while slaves and plantations were a distant reality to Northerners, for songwriters, minstrel shows were an artistically vulgar entertainment that could be a gold mine for song sales. To promote the songs, songwriters sold the first performance rights to one minstrel troupe, and that troupe performed the song on tour exclusively for 6 months. Sheet music was on sale in the lobby or in music shops in the town where the tour was going, and people could buy it and play and sing the songs at home. Composers earned royalties on the sale of the sheet music. Stephen had set out to be a songwriter, and he needed to support himself. This was his ticket. His early minstrel songs are catchy and written in the strong plantation dialect, which I never sing. These early songs fit right into the minstrel shows, but there was something special about Stephen's songs. Countless minstrel songs were written between 1840 and 1870, when the shows were really flourishing. But we remember songs by Stephen Foster, but we've forgotten most of the other songs. Stephen's songs are brilliant musically. They are somehow different from all the others. In 1847, at the age of 21, he penned a song for his singing club in Pittsburgh and then sold it to a minstrel troupe. Like many songs of the day, it was influenced by the minstrel show style, and as I say, it's written in plantation dialect, which I do not sing for you today. This song put Stephen Foster on the map professionally. It was first performed to a crowd that packed the Eagle Ice Cream Saloon when Stephen and his music club first performed it on Saturday, September 11th, 1847. Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee, gone to Louisiana, my true love for to see. Rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. Sun so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. Come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. It's a very simple little song, and it is written using 5 notes. The entire song is written using those 5 notes. One little note squeaks in on "Oh, Sue," but otherwise it's a pentatonic scale, pentatonic 5-tone. Five notes and 3 chords, and it's one of the most famous songs in the world. I had a dream the other night when everything was still. I dreamed I saw Susanna coming down the hill. The buckwheat cake was in her mouth, the tear was in her eye. Said I'm coming from the south, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. Come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. Come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Thank you. As popular as this song was, Stephen received no royalties for its sales. He sold the ownership of this song outright to the Peters Publishing House in Cincinnati for two $50 bills. It was the first cash he had ever received for writing a song. It was the only profit he ever made from this song. The Peters Publishing Company made more than $10,000 on this song in the first 3 years. Stephen didn't see any of that money. It enabled them to establish themselves as one of the great publishing houses in the United States. Within months, the tune was being whistled in soda shops and bars across the country. Within 3 years, 16 different publishers had published 30 different arrangements of the piece, and Stephen received no royalties for the sale of that sheet music. Do you notice that Stephen's name is not on the cover of these two editions? One has the name Wells and the other has no name at all. This lack of income from his popular song was the issue that plagued Stephen throughout his career. The role of songwriter had not really been established to the extent that there was a legal copyright law that protected the copyright ownership of the songs. Someone was making money from this song, but it wasn't Stephen Foster. $100 he made in his entire life from this song. Regarding the understanding of the realities of black life, keep in mind that Stephen wrote minstrel songs for cash. He was not a minstrel performer, nor did he attend the shows. He sold his songs to minstrel troupes, but he had never seen a slave or a plantation. Like most Northerners, he had no direct knowledge of the slave population depicted in his songs. He actually, from the very beginning, thought of these early minstrel songs, like the one I just sang, as trashy songs. That was the word he used to describe them in a letter to the great Edwin Christie that I'll quote a bit from. He preferred to create a more refined kind of parlor song. Parlor meaning it was meant to be sung at home by refined and tasteful amateur musicians. So I began today with Open Thy Lattice, Love, which is a typical parlor song. These songs were polite and refined. They were about chaste love. They were filled with soft images of nature that suggest qualities of human compassion and emotion. Dew, moonlight, flowers, gentle breezes, meadows, and streamlets. Not streams, but streamlets. They were usually lyrical ballads, not too specific, perhaps a serenade, or something about love, or something about sadness and loss. And they were singable and playable by amateur musicians. That's the thing. Amateurs could buy the sheet music and take it home and sing it with family and friends in their parlor. This is a parlor song from 1850 when Stephen was 24. It's a great example of the best of his parlor songs. In musical style, it combines the American folk song with a song, again, by the British composer Henry Bishop, who was flourishing at this time in London, or Franz Schubert in Vienna. Franz Schubert actually died just a couple of years after Stephen was born. Stephen was very familiar with Franz Schubert's songs. Like many of his works and countless songs in the 19th century, this song mourns the ephemeral nature of life and the brief and transient life of all that is beautiful. Ah, may the red rose live always to smile upon earth and sky. Why should the beautiful ever weep? Why should the beautiful die? Lending a charm to every ray that falls on her cheeks of light. Giving the zephyr kiss for kiss, and nursing the dewdrops bright. Ah, may the red rose Why should the beautiful ever weep? Why should the beautiful die? But the sheet music of Stephen's parlor songs sold only modestly. He was, in fact, receiving royalties for the song I just sang, but not many royalties at all. He earned a couple of cents per copy of sheet music. Royalties from the sale of parlor song sheet music alone could not support him. And he turned his hand back to minstrel songs because he seemed to have a knack for writing those little cheap, trashy songs. They must have just sprung off the point of his pen. So I'm going to now sing samples of 4 of his minstrel songs that show how his songs continued to evolve very dramatically and how he changed his style of writing and became someone different. First of all, can anybody tell me where the Camptown races took place? Where was Camptown? Does anybody know? Northeast Pennsylvania. Even I didn't know that before I researched this song. Stephen went to school when he was 15 for a year in a boarding school in Towanda, Pennsylvania, which is up in the northeast corner of the state, near where Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York all come together. And near there is a little town of Camptown where every year they had a steeplechase race. It was about 5 miles. Steeplechase is where there's no racetrack. There's a route that goes over ditches and through bogs and through swamps and through ponds and over fences, and that was the Camptown races. 10 years later, in 1850, he and his wife Jane were returning from their honeymoon in New York, and they passed through Towanda, and Stephen visited Camptown, and when he got back to Pittsburgh, he wrote a song about his memory of the races. If you want to sing along, the sing-along part of this song is really easy. It's only 2 words. The first word is do, and the second word is da. Chorus sounds like this. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. Bet my money on a bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay. Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. Camptown racetrack's 5 miles long, oh, doo-dah day. Come down here with my hat caved in, doo-dah, doo-dah. I go back home with a pocket full of tin, oh, doo-dah day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. Bet my money on a bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay. And if you notice, this is a 5-note song. The old horse stuck in a big mud hole, doo-dah, doo-dah. Can't touch bottom with a 10-foot pole, oh, doo-dah day. Bet my money on a bobtail nag, doo-dah, doo-dah. Keep my money in an old tow bag, oh, doo-dah day. Wanna run all night, gonna run all day. Bet my money on a bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. Bet my money on a bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay. While all this was going on, Stephen was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with being associated with the minstrel shows. At first, because he had been brought up to see African Americans as in a natural state of subservience, his motives for not wanting to be associated with the minstrel shows were more artistic than racial at the beginning. As a composer, he wanted to be taken seriously by cultured people. Minstrel show audiences at that time were usually all men, and the whole affair was coarse and loud and unruly. and it embarrassed him to be associated with this. In the early 1850s, just around the time that this song was written that I just sang, a few of the minstrel troupes were trying to become less raucous in attempt to attract more women into the audiences of the shows. And the shows were divided into 3 acts. The first act was the kind of raucous, wild minstrel show that we think of, with the men sitting on chairs across the stage and telling jokes to each other and playing the tambourine and the bones and the banjo. The second act gave a chance for some more thoughtful songs. Thoughtful by comparison, it was a low bar at that point, but nonetheless, the opportunity was there. And the third act was always some sort of a play of some sort. And Stephen began writing songs for that second act that were more refined, that offered a different image. He began depicting the black slaves as human beings who felt pain and love and joy and even nostalgia. His songs increasingly challenged the shallow minstrel stereotypes. He was starting in his songs to blur the distinctions between a minstrel song and a parlor song. And he was writing about issues that his white audience could relate to personally in their own hearts. His songs were bringing a new level of pathos and humanity into the minstrel song repertoire. He entered into an exclusive relationship with one of the greatest minstrel impresarios of the time, a performer who was also striving to attract a more refined audience. His name was Edwin Christie, and he was the soloist and leader of the famous Christie Minstrels, the leading minstrel troupe of the 1850s. In a letter to Christie, Stephen wrote, "I find that by my efforts, I have done a great deal to build up a taste for the minstrel songs among refined people, by making the words suitable to their taste, instead of the trashy and really offensive words which belonged to some of my earlier songs of that order." Christie aimed to bring a more refined audience with more artistic music, and this gave Stephen an opportunity to change direction, and it marks a decisive turning point in his music. In these next 3 songs, I will show you what I meant. They were all written expressly for that man to sing on stage with his minstrel troupe. And these 3 songs are milestones of Stephen's change in this more compassionate direction. Nellie Was a Lady was a minstrel song written by Stephen and published by a new, for him, publisher, Firth Pond and Company, in return for 50 copies of the sheet music. Beyond those 50 copies, he earned no money from the song. Firth and Pond in New York were trying him out. This was his first song published by them. In the future, songs written by Foster and published by Firth Pond would then pay royalties of 1 or 2 cents per copy. Nellie Was a Lady was different from earlier minstrel songs. It's deeply and sincerely sentimental. It touched the white audiences profoundly. The sentimental character endows the song with a moral and political agenda. Foster had begun to gentrify his minstrel songs and create in them a mandate for sympathy for the oppressed. Earlier minstrel songs written in the 1830s and 40s were denigrating and unsympathetic to the sufferings of the slave. But the sentimentality in Foster's newest songs put them clearly on the side of the anti-slavery movement. His songs conveyed sympathy for the slave, and this would have far-reaching consequences. Nellie Was a Lady is sung by a slave who loads firewood, cottonwood by name, onto riverboats all night. Cottonwood is a type of poplar. It's a very poor fuel source. It's pulpy and fast burning and leaves a lot of ash and residue, but it's plentiful along the rivers and it grows fast. In this late 19th century photo, you can see stacks of cottonwood ready to be loaded onto a riverboat. In the song, the slave is lamenting the death of his wife as he's loading the firewood on the boat. She's from Virginia, but the song takes place somewhere along the Mississippi River. Nellie Was a Lady is the first song written by a white composer for the minstrel shows that portrays a black man and woman as loving husband and wife. Now, first, marriage was not sanctioned for slaves, so calling her his bride is a stretch. The song also insists on referring to her as a lady, which was a term reserved for well-born white women. The lyrical melody and the references to the dear Virginia bride as a lady distinguish this song from everything that came before it in the first decade of the minstrel shows. Down on the Mississippi floating, long time I traveled on the way. All night the cottonwood a-toading, sing for my true love all the day. Nellie was a lady, last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dear Virginia bride. Now I'm unhappy and I'm weeping, can't tote the cottonwood no more. Last night while Nellie was a-sleeping, death came a-knocking at the door. Nellie was a lady, last night she died. Toll the knell for lovely Nell, my dear Virginia bride. Down in the meadow among the clover, walk with my Nellie by my side. Now all the happy days are over. Farewell, my dear Virginia bride. Nellie was a lady, last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dear Virginia bride. The amazing thing is that this sweet, tender, and melodious song is also it's a 5-note song. Just like O Susanna and Camptown Races, but how different it is. What distinguishes this song, first of all, is that it's a different style of music and singing. But it's not just the words or the melody, but the beautiful use of harmony as a foundation under the words and the melody. Stephen gets into the heart of his audience in his finest songs with his beautiful use of this eloquently simple chord progression like this. The words and the melody give us the story and the information, but the chords open our hearts. 2 years after writing Nellie Was a Lady, Stephen wrote a song about nostalgia, one of his most famous songs, and a song that is widely misinterpreted. It made an obscure river world famous. He had completed the poem, but he was still struggling with the river name. And he needed something that had 2 syllables. So in his early manuscript sketches, we see that he had this down. Way down upon the Yazoo River. I kid you not, scratched it out. He found another river in South Carolina. Way down upon the PD River. This didn't work for him either, because their sound didn't match the lyrical lilt of the melody. Remember, for a fine composer like Stephen, the word and the note is one thing. The word and the note are not 2 separate things. The sound of the word is part of the musical vocabulary. And Stephen needed a river name that flowed liquid off the tongue and lips more smoothly. So he went back to his atlas, and he noticed the name Suwannee, S-U-W-A-N-E-E, a little muddy river that starts in Georgia and flows quietly through the Florida Panhandle into the Gulf of Mexico. And he took out the U because he needed only 2 syllables, so Suwannee became Swanee. Within 1 year of the song's publication, the following article appeared in a Baltimore newspaper. This eyewitness account is all we need to know about the cross-cultural impact of Stephen Foster's songs. Quote, "Old folks at home, the latest minstrel melody is on everybody's tongue. Pianos and guitars groan with it night and day. Sentimental young ladies sing it. Sentimental young gentlemen warble it in midnight serenades. Boatmen roar it out stentorially. All the bands play it. Amateur flute blowers agonize over it every spare moment. The street organs grind it out at all hours. The singing stars carol it in the theaters and at concerts. The butcher's boy treats you to a strain or 2 of it as he hands you the steaks for dinner. The milkman mixes it up with the ding-dong of his tireless bell, and the chambermaid sweeps and dusts to the measured cadence of old folks at home." This newspaper article tells us that in 1 year's time, this song had become familiar through a very diverse population. Wealthy and poor, amateur and professional, black and white, male and female, old and young. And it had been adapted to many different kinds of music making, from casual and amateur to formal and professional. It's easy to mistakenly interpret the sentiments of this song as a white man's representation of a slave's nostalgia for the good old days on the plantation. That's not the meaning of the lyrics of this tune, or uniting them with such a memorable melody. Basically, this is a song about homesickness, something anyone can relate to. Yearning for home was a major issue in the middle of the 19th century as the country expanded and people moved west. And Foster wrote about this subject a lot. The song is the lament of an old man with memories of his siblings and his parents and the only home he ever knew. Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away, there's where my heart is turning ever, there's where the old folks play. All up and down the whole creation, sadly I roam, still longing for the old plantation and for the old folks at home. All the world is sad and dreary everywhere I roam. Oh Lordy, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home. All round the little farm I wandered when I was young. Then many happy days I squandered, many the songs I sung. When I was playing with my brother, happy was I. Oh, take me to my kind old mother, there let me live and die. All the world is sad and dreary everywhere I roam. Oh, Lordy, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home. By the way, you may have been looking at this sheet music if you had time to read through it, and notice that it says it's composed by Christy. Mm-hmm. This was a terrible mistake that Stephen made. It was part of his attempt to distance himself from the minstrel show repertoire. And he sold the rights, the authorship rights, to Christy for $15. A song this popular, he sold to Christy for $15. It ultimately caused a rift between them that was never healed. The thing to remember in calling him America's first songwriter is that because there'd never been a songwriter before, professional songwriters, as I said earlier, there weren't enough laws to protect them. There weren't enough laws to protect their rights. Fortunately, Firth and Pond, who published this song, knew that Stephen had written it, and they began to pay him some of the royalties after the first few years. Stephen was now almost 27 years old, and current events would propel him in the direction that he was already headed with his songwriting. In March of 1852, a book by an American woman began to stir things up in the United States and added fuel to the growing movement to abolish slavery. The American author Harriet Beecher Stowe published a virulent anti-slavery novel titled Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. In the United States, it sold more than 300,000 copies in its first year, and is credited with helping fuel the abolitionist cause and thereby with laying the groundwork for the Civil War. And it also greatly influenced Stephen's next compositional step and his depiction of enslaved blacks. Soon after the book came out, Stephen and his wife Jane took a trip on a riverboat down the Mississippi, from Pittsburgh to Louisville, where they changed boats, and from Louisville all the way down to New Orleans, and then all the way back up to Pittsburgh again. It was his only trip as an adult south of the Mason-Dixon line. For the first time in his life, he saw actual slaves on real plantations. Before leaving on the river trip, inspired by Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Stephen had sketched out the lyrics for a song. In his notebook, the poem is entitled Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night. And it is written, as all of Stephen's songs were, in this fake plantation dialect, a white songwriter's idea of how black slaves spoke. After returning from the journey down the Mississippi, he returned to his Poor Uncle Tom song. He scratched out the original title and he renamed it My Old Kentucky Home, Good Night. And then he rewrote the entire poem, and he rewrote it in straight English. It's Stephen's first song written for the professional minstrel stage with no plantation dialect. And when we grasp the details of the lyrics, we see how this song has been taken away from its roots by people who sing only the first verse and the chorus. The Kentucky Derby comes to mind. Mm-hmm. When we really grasp the details of the lyrics of this song and realize what it's actually about, it's a heartbreaking story. It's not simply a sentimental song about life in the good old days on the plantation. The narrator of this song, he's being sold away from his family. He's being sold away from his family. The time has come that we all have to part. The family's being broken up and sold to other owners. There were no sugarcane plantations in Kentucky, and most slaves there were domestic servants or farm workers. But he mentions the sugarcane. He's going to a sugarcane plantation farther south in the coastal region where the labor was brutally intense. And he suggests that he'll perish there as a result of being sold south, literally being sold down the river. And he's counting the days until his departure from his home and those he loves. A few more days, and my troubles all will end in the fields where the sugar canes blow. But it's not a song about slavery only. It's not a song, as some have said, a song glorifying plantation life. It's another song about home. It's a song about home and family. The themes in this song, loss and parting and death, are universal. And once again, the singer uses the word lady to address his beloved. Lady was not a term that anyone in those days would ever use for an African American woman. That was a woman. A white woman was a lady. In this stroke of musical genius, in this song, Stephen Foster brings to the stage of Edwin Christie's Blackface Minstrel Show a touching ballad that presents a black character with dignity and sympathy and real human emotion. No song like this had ever been written before by anybody. The sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. 'Tis summer and everyone is gay. The corn tops ripe and the meadows in the bloom, and the birds make music all the day. The young folks roll on the little cabin floor, all merry, all happy and bright. By and by hard times come a-knocking at the door, and my old Kentucky home, good night. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. They hunt no more for the possum and the coon on the meadow, the hill, and the shore. They sing no more by the glimmer of the moon on the bench by the old cabin door. The day goes by like a shadow o'er the heart, with sorrow where once was delight. The time has come when we all have to part, my old Kentucky home, good night. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song to the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. The head must bow and the back must have to bend wherever our people may go. A few more days, and my troubles all will end in the fields where the sugar canes grow. A few more days for to tote the weary load, no matter, 'twill never be light. A few more days till we totter on the road, my old Kentucky home. Good night. Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home, far away. Sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home, far away. Once again, I want to quote the African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass, the same man who castigated the minstrel troops in 1848. In a speech he gave in New York in 1855, he praised this song. He refers to several of Stephen's songs by name, including this one. And he says they are heart songs, and the finest feelings of human nature are expressed in them. They awaken the sympathies for the slave, in which anti-slavery principles take root, grow, and flourish. When I was researching this song for the first time about 7 years ago now, and I found this quote, it took my breath away when I first read it. And my discovery of these words by Frederick Douglass and discovery of the real meaning of the song inspired me to create this presentation about Stephen Foster's life. The last three songs I've just sung, Nellie Was a Lady, Old Folks at Home, and My Old Kentucky Home, were Stephen's finest and most sentimental and most compassionate minstrel songs. They appeared between 1850 and 1853. After those masterpieces, after writing almost 5 years for the minstrel troops, he more or less renounced the minstrel shows altogether. This fact is crucial to understanding his position on minstrelsy and his attitude toward blackface. During the 5 years when his greatest minstrel songs were published, from 1848 to 1853, the minstrel show had become somewhat sympathetic to the burden of the slaves. But in 1853, everything began to change. The minstrel shows had to keep up with public opinion and respond to the anxieties of their paying audiences. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, and it unbalanced the North-South equilibrium by permitting slavery to exist anywhere in any new territory, North or South. The new law said that it was unconstitutional for Congress to prohibit slavery in any state. Hence, the Missouri Compromise, which had in 1820 established boundaries for the slave states, was completely abrogated. There were bloody confrontations in Kansas and elsewhere in 1854, showing that the issue of slavery was threatening the status of the Union. And of course, rather than blaming the problems on slavery or the laws around it, the minstrel shows and their audiences put the blame on the victim, the black slave. And so beginning in 1853, when the song I just sang first appeared, and into 1854, the minstrel show quickly became politicized and completely eliminated all sympathetic images of blacks from their shows. They returned to the malicious and vicious early depictions of black slaves. Even the Christie minstrels, who under Edwin, the founder, had promoted a sympathetic portrayal of blacks, changed this model in 1854. Christie retired from the stage and turned the show over to his brother George. And from 1853 to the Civil War, nearly all vestiges of black humanity were eliminated from minstrel shows. The image of the plantation became absurdly idyllic. There was a heightened stereotype of black men as childlike and shiftless and irresponsible and stupid. And even the free blacks were pictured as hopelessly inadequate and attacked as weaklings who longed for the guidance of white men and the security of the old plantation. In other words, the minstrel shows had returned to their roots from the 1830s. And after My Old Kentucky, a few years before the Civil War, he stopped writing songs for minstrel troops, and he never went back and wrote for them again. He set out to write only refined parlor songs for cultured people to sing at home, or songs for the newly developing music halls, which were featuring both men and women in the audiences. And my last 5 songs today are songs like these. Here is one of Stephen's finest little miniature parlor ballads. I love knowing the specific roots of a song, what made the song happen, why was it created. On an evening in the late 1850s, Stephen was still living in Pittsburgh. He was getting ready to move to New York City, and he was going out to a formal dinner, and he was all dressed up in his formal finery, and there was a knock at the door saying that the 11-year-old daughter of some neighbors and very good friends had been trampled to death by a horse. So Stephen immediately dropped his plans and in his formal attire went to the neighbor's house and spent the whole night with them, consoling them. And the next morning he came home and he wrote this lovely, quaint, and old-fashioned song. And as in the earlier parlor song I sang for you, Ah, May the Red Rose Live Always, this is about the fleeting life of the beautiful. More children died in the 1850s on average than died today. People died of all sorts of things that we wouldn't think of today because we put neosporin on that infection. We'd have that infected tooth pulled by somebody who knew what they were doing. We'd take an antibiotic pill. People died young in the 1850s, and every family had experienced death. Thou wilt come no more, gentle Annie, like a flower thy spirit did depart. Thou art gone, alas, like the many that have bloomed in the summer of my heart. Shall we never more behold thee, never hear thy lovely voice again? When the springtime comes, gentle Annie, when the wildflowers are scattered o'er the plain, when the wildflowers are scattered o'er the plain. This next song would make Stephen Foster worth listening to if he'd only written one song. It's one of his greatest songs. It's another parlor song. But it's not a ballad about gentle, tender love or loss. It's a song with a moral. It's a song with an admonition for us all. And it's not just a timeless song, it's a timely song. its words are just as significant to us today as when it was written just before the Civil War. It says that we should be mindful of the poor while we are enjoying mirth and music and life's pleasures. The song admonishes the listener to have compassion for the sigh of the weary, for the marginalized souls around us who find themselves in poverty and want. Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. 'Tis the song that lingers forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. While we seek mirth and beauty and music light and gay, there are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a sigh that is wafted across the troubled wave. 'Tis a cry that is heard upon the shore. 'Tis a dirge that is murmured around the lonely grave. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. Oh, hard times come again no more. As the world around him continued to change, so did the general public's desire for music. Sensing that he needed to write a new kind of song, Stephen moved with his wife and daughter to New York City in 1860. And they began their life on the East Coast. And here is by far the strangest slide I have to show you. In the East Coast, living in a boarding house in this building in Hoboken, New Jersey. Yes, we've come from Pittsburgh and plantations in the South to Hoboken, New Jersey. This building still stands today. Stephen wanted to be part of the New York musical scene, and he wanted to put distance between himself and his conservative family. Both his parents had died by this time. His brother Morrison, with whom he had been close, with whom he had selected the word Swanee, Morrison had joined the leadership of a group called the Copperheads. They were based in Cleveland, Ohio, and this pro-slavery organization came close to being a domestic terrorist organization supporting the southern states from north of the Mason-Dixon line. His sister was married to the brother of James Buchanan, the president before Lincoln, who had been partly responsible for the hideous Supreme Court ruling in the Dred Scott case, which affirmed that runaway slaves who reached the North must be returned to their owners in the South. So he needed to put space between him and his family members. And there is no indication that there was any confrontation directly between them, but he wrote songs that established what he was standing for. And perhaps unable to deal with the disharmony, he used music to solve his family issues. Stephen and Jane and their daughter Marion moved from Hoboken to Manhattan. But life in furnished rooms and boarding houses was too much to bear for Jane as a wife and a mother. And she and their daughter returned to Pennsylvania in 1861. She was a skilled telegraph operator, and she had a career in Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh working for Western Union. Jane made one more visit to New York alone in 1862, and after that, Jane and Stephen never saw each other again. The songwriting and musical scene was changing in the U.S. Sentimental, emotional songs about the past were no longer popular, nor were songs about dead and dying young people. Because in the early 1860s, with the development of photography, there were real young dead men to think of, and their photographs were in the newspaper, taken by photographers like the great Matthew Brady. Photography and the enormity of deaths made the realities of the current war impossible to sentimentalize away. And Stephen decided to change his tune literally and write songs for the hour, which favored Civil War songs and comic songs. And that's exactly what my next two songs are. By 1862, when the war was well advanced, Stephen explained his situation as a songwriter in the words of his own song, "That's What's the Matter." The reason he decided to write songs in a different style was, quote, "We live in hard and stirring times, too sad for mirth, too rough for rhymes, for songs of peace have lost their chimes, and that's what's the matter." And thus it seems that Stephen made a conscious decision to write a new kind of song. Remember, as you hear this song, that in the 1860s, the newly formed Republican Party was the anti-slavery party of Lincoln. The Democratic Party in 1860s was strong in the South and was pro-slavery. Forward-thinking politicians were striving to transcend this division, and Stephen reflected this in his song. But once the war had once begun, quote, "all party feeling soon was gone. We joined as brothers, every one." It expresses Stephen's own and New York City's attitude about breaking off relations with the South. New Yorkers and Stephen were aware that devotion only to party and politics would have to take second place to loyalty to the nation and the Union. We live in hard and stirring times, too sad for mirth, too rough for rhymes, for songs of peace have lost their chimes, and that's what's the matter. The men we held as brothers true have turned into a rebel crew, so now we have to put them through, and that's what's the matter. That's what's the matter. The rebels have to scatter. We'll make them flee by land and sea, and that's what's the matter. Oh yes, we thought our neighbors true. We indulged them as their mothers do, but they stormed our bright red, white, and blue, and that's what's the matter. We'll never give up what we gain, for now we know we must maintain our laws and rights with might and main. And that's what's the matter, that's what's the matter. The rebels have to scatter, we'll make them flee by land and sea. And that's what's the matter. The rebels thought we would divide, and Democrats would take their side. Then they would let the Union slide, and that's what's the matter. But when the war had once begun, all party feeling soon was gone. We joined as brothers everyone, and that's what's the matter. That's what's the matter. The rebels have to scatter, we'll make them flee by land and sea. And that's what's the matter. Before I sing my last two songs, a funny song and a great song, I want to thank the people who made this possible. I want to thank Ollie for inviting me here. I want to thank Michelle Crompton for all the great work that she does. Thank you, Michelle. I was supposed to do this very program on the 28th of November, as all of you know. And I woke up that morning with hardly any voice at all. I was so sick. And I, without any even thinking about it, I called Michelle. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I can't do the concert. And within 2 or 3 hours, I was testing positive for COVID. So I'm glad I didn't try to do that concert, for all our sakes. I'm very, very grateful to be here today. I'm very grateful that Michelle's husband, John Crompton, is videotaping this to make it available for those who paid to attend this session but weren't able to be here today. Thank you, John, for doing that. And I want also to thank my dear wife, Gina Gordon, who is sitting over there in the corner. If you don't know her, you should. She's a really interesting person. She's an author and a retired chef and a wonderful artist. And we just recently celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. We are victims of late onset love, that's what she calls it. And without Gina, I wouldn't have anything to sing about. So thank you for being with me. Sometime in 1863, Stephen and his friend George Cooper decided to pose for a photograph as if nothing else monumental was happening in the world at that time. All that remains of this scene is a scratched, foggy daguerreotype, and you are viewing an artist's rendition of the original faded photo. Cooper had a talent for writing lyrics that fit a new style of popular song that would take hold of the country after the Civil War. It was a new style of song and a new style of show. One difference between the pre-war songs and those published later in the century was that the new songs were comparatively optimistic. Rather than pining for days gone by, they demonstrated a hope for the future, in spite of or because of what the nation had experienced during the Civil War. The Foster-Cooper collaboration was at its best when they produced clever songs like You've Only Got a Mustache, songs in a style that Stephen, in his own right, might not have produced. The song was written for the great music hall singer, Tony Pastor. Now, there was a famous band leader and saxophonist in the 1950s named Tony Pastor. This is obviously not him. Antonio Pastor was born in New York in 1837, and he was a superstar impresario and performer, a comedian, a songwriter, and a singer. And he is generally credited with establishing a new style of variety show that came to be known as vaudeville. This is the man who started vaudeville. And I find it fascinating that Stephen Foster began his career writing for his music club in Pittsburgh and ends up 20 years later writing songs for the beginnings of vaudeville in New York City. Here is that song. Do we have any mustaches in the, we have a beard, Might be a beard behind that mask there. There's a beard there. There are a few mustaches here. There's a beautiful mustache looking at me right back there. Oh, all of you poor single men, don't ever give up in despair, for there's always a chance where there's life to capture the hearts of the fair. No matter what may be your age, you always may come to find dash. You will suit all the girls to the hair if you've only got a mustache, a mustache, a mustache, if you've only got a mustache. No matter your manners or style, no matter your birth or your fame, all these used to have something to do with young ladies changing their name. There's no reason now to despond or go and do anything rash. You'll do well, though you can't raise a cent, if you only raise a mustache, a mustache, a mustache, if you only raise a mustache. Your head may be thick as a block and empty as any football. Your eyes may be green as the grass, and your heart just as hard as a wall. Yet take the advice that I give. You'll soon gain affection and cash, and you'll be quite a hit with the girls if you've only get a mustache, a mustache, a mustache, if you only get a mustache. I once was in sorrow and tears, because I was jilted, you know. So right down to the river I ran to quickly dispose of my woe. A good friend there gave me advice and timely prevented my splash. And now I've a wife and 10 children because I grew a mustache, a mustache, a mustache. If you've only got a mustache, a mustache, a mustache. If you've only got a mustache. It's a myth that Stephen could not keep track of his money. He actually was a trained bookkeeper, impeccably so, and a professional accountant. And as a young man, he had worked part-time for one of his brothers who had a shipping company on the Ohio River as his accountant. During his 20-year career from his first song in 1844 to his death in 1864, Stephen's songs earned him a total of $15,091.08. That's about $300,000 in 2023 over a period of 20 years, or about $15,000 a year in today's money. Who can live on $15,000 a year today? Today, if protected by modern copyright laws, he would have been worth millions. But what he left us is worth more than that. In his songs, Stephen gives us something of himself. And I think it's that honesty that makes the songs so timeless. It's that honesty that makes his most beautiful songs last so long. He tried to strike a balance first between the minstrel songs and the parlor ballads, and then he left them behind and began to pursue new popular styles demanded by the audiences. And he'd begun to accomplish this, but he couldn't make enough money, and then he died. He spent his last few years in New York City trying to be part of the songwriting scene there. But all the other composers writing songs were also performers, or they were teachers, or they were involved in other businesses. He was earning his money only from songwriting. And because of the rampant piracy of his songs, he received few royalties, and he was living on loans from friends. He was selling new songs for cash because he didn't have time to wait for royalties that might never come. He was living hand to mouth and song to song. He was in declining health. He probably had asthma. He was a heavy smoker. He lived in a furnished room in the shabby American Hotel, which was one step up from a boarding house in the Bowery district of Lower Manhattan, where the theater activity was concentrated in those days. In his room, he had a small cooking device that burned spirits, and in December of 1863, it tipped and it spilled burning fuel on his thigh, and the burn was not healing, and it had become infected. And then in early January 1864, he became ill with a severe respiratory infection. He developed a high fever. On January 10th, he got out of bed and went to the door to call out into the corridor to a chambermaid to bring him some towels. And according to the chambermaid, he turned to go back into the room and collapsed to the floor. On his way down, he hit the nightstand that had a porcelain wash basin on it, and the porcelain shattered. And if you've ever worked with porcelain, you know that it's like a knife edge, and it gashed his neck and his upper arm. And the chambermaid sent word to George Cooper, the man in the photograph with Stephen, the man who wrote the funny words to the last song. And Cooper rushed to Stephen's hotel and found his friend lying on the floor in a pool of blood. And Cooper later recalled that Stephen looked up at him and said, "George, I'm done for." It took an hour or two to find a doctor who actually stitched him up, still lying on the floor. And then it took several more hours to get him to the hospital, and he was ill, he was weak, he was in shock, and he'd lost a lot of blood. There were no blood transfusions or antibiotics in those days, and in 48 hours, he was gone. Stephen Collins Foster died on January 13, 1864. His age was 37 years and 6 months and 5 days. Among his belongings, they found this little leather wallet. In the wallet were 38 cents, his entire fortune, and a scrap of butcher paper with these words written in his handwriting in pencil: "Dear friends and gentle hearts." Let that sink in for a minute. Those words in his handwriting, he liked to write poetry on butcher paper because it was plentiful and cheap. He could get it anywhere. What do these words signify? A song title? First lines of a song? We'll never know for sure. But as a musician and a scholar, and somebody who spent a lot of time with Stephen and his music now for nearly a decade, I firmly believe that this is what Stephen wanted us to feel about his songs, and he wanted us to feel for each other when we listen to his songs. He expressed himself in his music, and the tenderness of these words comes to us in so many of his finest songs. And so we've come to the end of Stephen Foster's story. But although life is short, art endures, and his songs have somehow embedded themselves into not only the fabric of American heritage, but into the music of other lands around the globe. I hope that after hearing the story of Stephen Foster's life and the story of his songs, and how he struggled to emerge from the darkness of the minstrel genre, you might have compassion for his struggle and admiration for his music. Stephen Foster is dead. Long live Stephen Foster. I'd like to leave you with the last great song Stephen Foster wrote. He reaches back to his roots and gives us a simple song of great sweetness. It was for songs like this that I believe he most wanted to be remembered. He composed this song in the final year of his life, perhaps in that shabby hotel room where he died. And he sold it to a publisher for a few dollars. The song was not published while he was still alive, so he never knew if people would like the song, or if anyone would ever want to sing it, or if anyone would even care about it. It was first published and first saw the light of day in March of 1864, 2 months after he died. So let's depart today with our hearts filled with the beauty of this song and with the memory of the sweet man who wrote it. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. sounds of the rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng, beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, out on the sea, mermaids are chanting the wild lorelei. Over the streamlets, vapors are born, waiting to fade at the bright coming morn. Beautiful dreamer, beam on my heart, even as the morn on the streamlets and sea. Then will all clouds of sorrow depart, beautiful dreamer, awake unto me.